people gonna rise like the water. We gonna face this crisis now. I hear the voice of my great granddaughter saying, keep it in the ground. Come on now. The people gonna rise like the water. We gonna face this crisis now. I hear the voice of my great granddaughter saying, keep it in the. One more time. The people gonna rise like the water. We gonna face this crisis now. I hear the voice of my great granddaughter saying, keep it in the ground. The people gonna rise like water. We gonna face this crisis now. I hear the voice of my great granddaughter saying, keep it in the ground. Let's go. The people gonna rise like the water. We gonna face this crisis now. I hear the voice of my great granddaughter saying, keep it in.
All right, hey everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So as people start filtering in, my name is Ryan. I'm with Halt to Harm Network. I use pronouns he, him, and his, and I'm super honored to be here today. We're about to get started, so feel free to drop your, say hi in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you want, you can switch your view from speaker to gallery, and you can welcome to turn on your camera, wave hello. It's always really fun to see everybody that's here. We've got a lot of people coming in now, and we are live, about to get started in just a moment. All right. So I'm going to turn this over to Mary Aguilera, who's going to be doing an introduction. Yeah, Kelsey, you just say we are recording. Yes, thanks, Kelsey. And so, yeah, just know that we're recording here today, and you can choose to have your video on and off. And the other thing is to stick around to the end. Mary might say something about this too, right? So, but we're going to have some breakouts and discussion. So I'll be in the chat along with Kelsey, hanging out, offering some technical support. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for saying hi in the chat. Mary?
All right, welcome everyone to the A to Z Tackling Impacts of Plastic Students Taking on Petrochemicals event. And when you say when you are here, you are A to Z family. The A to Z Tackling Impacts of Plastic digital series is bringing together organizations and communities all across the Ohio River Valley and beyond. The intent is to build a large connected basis of people in each to its own capacity. We also look to our brothers and sisters in other states who are facing daily threats from petrochemical companies and already facing major impacts on their health, economy, and environment. The aim is to provide education, invoke solutions, and determine actions we can take to address the threats of plastics and the petrochemical industry. So we welcome you to stick around. Like Ryan said, we'll be doing at the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A and some networking, and then we always have like a parking lot chat afterwards as well that you're welcome to stay for a little bit. So without further ado, I will pass it off to BJ.
Just had to find my mute button. Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see everybody's faces or names. I understand. I don't always like to be on video either. So yeah, let's get started, and I'm going to try to make it as quick as possible because I am really looking forward to our guest speakers tonight, to the youth that have generously giving their time tonight. So for over a year, I think it's been almost a year and a half, the people that I've had the absolute privilege of working with is an amazing group of dedicated grassroots leaders and community members on the A to Z Impacts of Plastic educational series that we've been putting on. I'm happy to see old friends and new people here with us tonight. We have a marvelous group of university and college organizers who are going to share their amazing community work, what they've done, the successes that us old guard, the OG as we call ourselves, can be rightfully proud and a little envious of, right? We brought people together over this last year to learn and discuss what the consequences and future threats of an expansion the petrochemical industry will have on us from cradle to grave in the Ohio River Valley, in the Gulf of Mexico, and across the world, because it's all connected, right? We've explored climate, economics, human and environmental health, and explored some possible solutions. But as I was thinking about tonight and what this last year has meant to me and meant to the folks here tonight, our old friends and the newcomers, it struck me that our most precious resource is us, right? It's the relationships that we've cultivated working together closely, despite the pandemic, or, in spite of the pandemic. And in many ways, this pandemic has been a direct result of the abuse and the exploitation of nature. Our many relatives whom we've exploited, taken without thought, their homes and resources. We've taken all that we've been given for granted. And I'll have to take some responsibility for that too at times in my life. We've dismissed our relatives as folly. We've dismissed our old ways as folly. And sometimes we thought of them as not as good or faster, cheaper, shiny, and more appealing. Tonight, I want to remind everyone that the lands they occupy now, wherever you are, were once lands of many nations, communities, clans, and confederacies. Here in Appalachia, where I am now, were some of my relatives, the Seneca. We shared these abundant resources in beautiful mountains, rivers, and hollers with the Cherokee, the Shawnee, the Lenni Lenape, Tuscarora, and Mingo, and so many more that I don't think we'll ever know, sadly. And these nations were all different in how they lived and celebrated their origins, made friends, and solved problems and faced challenges. But one thing that I think is really important, that they all seem to have in common, was the knowledge that nothing lived in this world without something else dying or giving their lives for theirs. Another similarity was the way they governed themselves, the way they maintained a peaceful balance among their peoples. Their way of self-governance was for all people, everyone participating in the process of decision-making, whether that was to sit and counsel and listen, or to speak their mind as to how they all must consider a problem or a decision that had to be made for their survival. Those could be whether to move their location, deal with nature's winds of change, relationships with other nations, war or peace. But one thing they all knew for sure was that whatever decision was to be made, it would have an impact on everyone. And therefore, the decision and action must be made carefully and with meaningful thought. Take time to hear everyone, to honor and act as they were expected to live up to their responsibilities. When the invaders came, the original people believed that these new people conducted themselves in the same way, that these new people honored their promises as they did, that everyone, man, woman, and child, played a part in the final decision or act of the many. They learned, sadly, that the powerful few, educated or not, honest or honorable or not, were the ones dictating their fate, making decisions not based on the good of many, but only the few. Right. Learn as much as you can, excuse me, but only the few. So tonight, I'm thinking that, we're facing the same, right? The many being ruled by the powerful few. So now our responsibility is to remember that the decisions and actions that we make, that we demand of our politicians, of our community leaders, should always be with the many in mind. Because no matter the place we are in time, everything we do has consequences. So our mandate, if you will, should be to make changes and find solutions that have the least impact. Take the least from mother, and in all things, give more than you take. So tonight, I'm suggesting, I know we're all busy, but I hope that you'll take the time wherever you're at to learn about the people that were there, that this was their home, how they lived, how they survived, the foods they ate, the animals that they shared their lands with. But most importantly, right now, I want to thank and welcome our young frontline organizers that are here tonight. They give me hope, as they should everyone. I think without a shadow of a doubt that we'll all learn some things tonight. I know I will. Hopefully we'll learn how we can help them carry on their work. And I hope they'll carry on this work in some form or fashion in their future. They've got a good start for sure. I will say they've got the work cut out for them, but I'm going to make a promise. I'm here for them if they need me. So thank you everyone for giving us your time this evening. It's a Monday evening, and with so much happening, I'm sure in your individual lives, but we welcome you with our good heart and a good mind. And I'm now going to turn this over to Mary. Jack.
I'm actually going to take over from now, BJ, but thank you so much for
always prepared.
Thank you so much though for that beautiful orientation and land acknowledgement. I put a link in the chat for folks who aren't aware of the native land that they're living on now. I'll put it in there one more time. You can use that map in order to find out.
Yeah, let us know where you're at.
Yeah, and so now I'll be tonight's host for our panel discussion with our student organizers. Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up and for being a part of our conversation and joining the A to Z family tonight. So to introduce myself, my name is Kelsey Mcnall. I use she or they pronouns. I'm a regional organizer for the Climate Reality Project. I also do a lot of work with the People Over Petro Coalition, and I am a part of the planning team for the Tackling the A to Z Impacts of Plastic series. I've done a lot of work behind the scenes for a lot of these events, so I'm excited to join the conversation a little bit more with you all tonight. And I'm really excited to introduce these really incredible student panelists. I graduated from college in 2019, so I did a bunch of student organizing in my day, but I'm really excited to hear the awesome things that students are doing today on their campuses throughout Appalachia. Just to provide a bit more context for who our guests will be tonight, we came across meeting these wonderful students through their involvement with an internship program with the Post Landfill Action Network, or PLAN. The internship was very cleverly called Students Taking on Petrochemicals, or STOP, students working to stop the petrochemical build out of Appalachia. And just really brief context on that. Essentially, there's a lot of fracking and oil and gas infrastructure that exists in Appalachia and is being built out in the region, mostly intended to produce plastic. And so that's what we're all about here at A to Z, to tackle that, to educate folks and raise awareness for these issues. And that's what these students are doing through their internship program and through just their organizing in general. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our panelists just to introduce themselves briefly. And maybe I'll just pick one to start. Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rachel. I like they and she in that order. I am a first-year master's student at West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia, which is occupied Mohawk and Seneca land, among others. And I went to Oberlin College for my undergrad and started Petrochem organizing on the pipeline side, like direct action against pipelines there, and have since continued with that here. I came to this program to do research on the emotional consequences of pipelines. With that, I will pass it to Bryant.
Cool. Hello, I'm Bryant Grant. I go to the University of Louisville. I'm an undergrad economics major, and then I'm on occupied land of the Shawnee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Osage. And my work's mostly been rooted in educating, engaging, and spreading awareness about like petrochem and the problems that it creates in communities. And my pronouns are he, him, his. And then I'll popcorn to Leah.
Thank you, Bryant. I'll apologize in advance. My Wi-Fi is a little in and out, so let me know if I need to repeat anything. My name is Leah. My pronouns are they and them. I'm from occupied Anishinaabe land in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but most of my work has been in Wooster, Ohio, and in the Ohio River Valley. My focus has been on environmental justice in Appalachia, and I've also worked a lot with mutual aid and talking about mutual aid as a sustainable climate justice, a sustainable way to move toward climate justice and move towards a lot of things. My research right now is actually focused not on Appalachia, but focused on climate resilience within First Nation communities in coastal Louisiana. So that's where I am right now. And I'm really excited for the rest of tonight. I'm going to popcorn to Selena.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leah. Hi, everyone. My name is Selena. I'm currently a graduating senior from Washington Jefferson College, occupying on Shawnee and Osage territory. So I'm actually graduating on Tuesday, technically. So that's really exciting. And I am currently a triple major at Washington Jefferson College, studying environmental studies, international studies, and Spanish with a minor in interfaith leadership cooperation. So my main focus is understanding environmental justice movements and understanding how we could kind of like create sustainable alternatives, not just domestically, but internationally. So next fall, I'll actually be attending Penn State School of International Affairs for a master's in international affairs with a focus in climate diplomacy. And with that, I will popcorn Bailey.
Thank you, Selena. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here with you tonight. My name is Bailey Epperly. I use she, they pronouns, and I am a fifth-year undergrad student at Marshall University studying sociology in Huntington, West Virginia, which is occupied Adena and Hopewell land. A few years ago, I founded Marshall Sustainability Club at Marshall, and I have pretty much just been facilitating that group and organizing with other students and community organizers to create change and spread awareness about the detriments of petrochemicals and plastics. The club successfully ran a Break Free from Plastic petition with our president signing the pledge and us becoming the first school in Appalachia to do so. So I'm still like super excited about that. And we're just kind of going forth with figuring out all the logistics for that. And we're also currently working on a mural project. So I consider myself an artivist. So I really enjoy using art as a form of activism and resistance. And I plan on furthering my artivist and organizing roles here in West Virginia after I graduate next semester.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for your introductions. I'm definitely really excited to dive into this conversation a little bit more. So just to open things up, to get the conversation going, I want to talk a little bit more about just what the communities that you're facing, what the communities that you're in are facing in Appalachia, whether that's your campus community or your hometown. I would just love for each of you to speak a bit to the way that the oil and gas and petrochemical industry, the plastics industry, is impacting your campus community and the community beyond. And if anybody wants to start, you can go ahead and jump in, or I can pick someone again.
I can go. I'm right along the Ohio River. It's like a large increase in like cancer rates, and our air quality is pretty bad. Like the most notable ones. And it's just people like come here from like all around Kentucky, and then it kind of gives the opportunity to learn about the impacts that this is having in like other regions, which is a positive. But that's learned from all the negatives that are going on like in Louisville and like specific Louisville communities like the West End and Rubbertown, which are primarily like lower income and people of color. So yeah, and then just trying to like teach them how to like interact with those communities to like help them and not like overstep and be mean.
Yeah, go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, kind of in the same vein. So a lot of Ohio is so agricultural that like land, air, and water contamination. I mean, it's a big issue everywhere, but especially with agriculture and a lot of food coming out of the area. Land contamination is a big issue that is often not discussed. And so that's a big issue, especially we have a lot of like Spanish-speaking migrant farm communities. And so even when there's information about the harm of petrochemicals in the soil in English, it's where it presents a lot of
So Leah, we're losing you a little bit there. It may be helpful if you turn your video off in terms of us being able to hear you a little more clearly. We missed a little bit of the last part. We caught a lot what you were saying about the issues with agricultural pollution and how that intersects with environmental justice for Spanish-speaking migrant workers. But I don't know if you want to finish off or add anything there since you cut off.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. My Wi-Fi's been very in and out. Yeah, so definitely a lot of intersecting issues there. And there's been a big issue with the translation of like kind of warning documentation and signage. Even though that's not as deep as, or it's a deep issue, but obviously fixing the issue is another really big thing. So yeah, sorry again, let me know if you can't hear me at any point.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for sharing that. That really reminds me too, so the issues with the oil and gas and petrochemical industry, the Ohio Valley is deeply affected, but also the folks affected first and worst by this industry are folks in the Gulf South. And I know that, especially in Houston, Texas, that's a really large environmental justice issue around this industry, is that a lot of the communications surrounding the pollution coming from different oil and gas infrastructure and from plastics manufacturing and oil refineries. A lot of the communications around those things are in English, and that so in that way, the Spanish speaking community is left behind. So thank you for raising that. It's really important. And Selena, do you want to speak to how your community is impacted by this industry?
Yeah, so where I kind of live in Washington, Pennsylvania, it's kind of like at this epicenter of just petrochemical boom and all these toxic industries. And as Brian was mentioning about where he lives, the air quality here is just so poor. I know that myself and my family were like constantly keeping track of the air quality, and a lot of the times in this region, it's low, poor, or even like below that. And kind of what I've been doing as a campus organizer is trying to bring a lot of awareness to those issues, because I feel like sometimes we just think like, oh, it's no big deal. Like this is a daily thing. I know whenever I was little, like my mom would always tell me like we have like a couple of like really bad plants like near where I live that we would have to like pass through to get to other places and whatnot. And so I remember my mom, like whenever I was little, always telling me like, oh, hold your breath. Like this is just too much. And that would just be something normal to me. Like I knew whenever I passed like the El Rama power plant or something like that, like I was supposed to hold my breath. Like that was bad air. I wasn't supposed to breathe in. But at the same time, it was so normalized to me that I didn't understand that that was even a problem until I was in college and I took my very first environmental science course. Like that wasn't even something that was really taught to me in high school. And so that's kind of where I guess my passion for this issue really started out. And then working with my school, Washington Jefferson College, has been really difficult in terms of how we're able to kind of like fight against these industries, especially because my school has what's called a Center for Energy Policy Management. So that's affiliated with the school, but not 100% part of the school. They have an office at our school, and they're very like fracking neutral. And so I remember when I was a sophomore a couple years ago, I actually wanted to like work for the energy policy management place. And during my interview, they were kind of like, oh, like you're an environmental studies major. Like what exactly do you do with that? And I was like, oh, like I'm, really passionate about taking on like petrochemical industry in the region and things like that. And by saying that, I ended up like not even getting the job because this center was neutral on fracking and things like that. That's associated with my school. So that really kind of jump-started me and inspired me to kind of like take on these issues head on during my last couple years as a student.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing. And Selena, just clarify, did you grow up in the Washington County area as well?
Yeah, so I grew up in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania, which is like right on the border between Allegheny County and Washington County. So right outside of Pittsburgh, really.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I feel like that speaks really well to sort of the notion that being neutral on an issue, that there is really no such thing as being neutral on an issue, that choosing neutrality is a stance in itself, and that there are folks in communities that are harmed by neutrality in that way. And I see, Rachel, you have your hand up. So I'll pass it over to you. I know you probably can also speak to a little bit of the experience of being an organizer at a university, perhaps with some ties to the industry. So I'd love to hear from you about how your community is impacted.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a big surprise to hear that WVU has its hands on oil and gas. I mean, Morgantown to some extent is impacted by the industry. I mean, there's a barge dock on the river here. And yeah, fracking and oil and gas do come through here. But I think WVU is such a power in the state, and I think that they have an entire school funded by oil and gas, dedicated to oil and gas. WVU gets millions of dollars from oil and gas, and I think that they have a huge responsibility in the state when it comes to protecting health of the residents here. WVU is in all 55 counties. I love to talk about that. So I think for me, my approach to WVU is less that people are directly affected here, although people are, but I think, like, to me, the bigger issue is that WVU has a huge responsibility in this state and isn't taking that the way that it should be taken. So I think that is how, like, oil and gas is sort of more directly impacting my day-to-day, is going to a school that is perpetuating health problems and climate change and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, just to answer that question.
I wonder too if you would be able to say a few words about also how communities in West Virginia are impacted not only by the oil and gas industry, but how that intertwines with impacts from the coal industry.
Yeah. So, I mean, West Virginia is like the sort of quintessential case of Appalachia in that it's like an internal resource colony. So it started with timber, then it was very famously coal, and now oil and gas, which I think is being propped up as the next iteration of an extractive economy, even though it's clearly not the boon that it's claimed to be. And so I think I understand oil and gas to be the latest iteration of resource extraction and sort of the forms of resource colonialism within the states, and the ways in which, like, certain lands and certain people are sacrificed for, like, the good of the nation. So people always claim that oil and gas is needed for energy independence, even though we export so much of our oil and gas. But that Appalachia is supposed to be the sacrifice zone for that. And I think by encouraging oil and gas research, by sending people to work in those industries, you are perpetuating this idea that land and people here should be sacrificed for people in cities and people in other places and people around the world, in addition to many people in the world being sacrificed through climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I just want to elevate what Young put in the chat also, that a lot of this new oil and gas industry isn't even for energy. It is for plastic. For folks in our audience wondering, what does this all have to do with plastic? Why is this tackling the A to Z impacts of plastic? So thank you for that. So Bailey, I wonder, do you want to speak at all to the way that your community at Marshall University and in the community are impacted by this industry?
Yeah, I'll quickly touch upon this so I don't take up too much time, but this is a really big question to me, just someone that is often used to thinking sociologically. I think that it would honestly be easier to give examples of how extractive industries don't impact my community, because it really impacts pretty much anything that you look at within a society on an individual and collective level. But yeah, just growing up in Charleston, West Virginia, which is only an hour from Huntington, I grew up on the Kanawha River. My house was just a few feet from it. My parents actually still live there. So I often have to live with the fear that they will develop cancer or health problems and that I may as well. And knowing that many of my family members have died because of this sort of like sacrifice state that West Virginia is in. So being a younger person, we're trying to grow up and find our place in the world, figure out what we want to do with our lives. And there's this added layer that we are constantly fighting against and to break out of. So when you grow up hearing all of these stereotypes about West Virginians and Central Appalachians, you start to internalize that to an extent, and you have to question yourself and your place in the world. So that's something that I have definitely struggled with, and I see almost all of my friends struggling with. So something that I really wanted to highlight is that, so I was supposed to graduate about a year ago. So a lot of people that I went to high school with and, met at Marshall my first year with immediately left as soon as they graduated. And this is either because of that internalized sense of a sacrifice zone. So people don't want to stay somewhere where their health and their family's health is at risk. They also don't want to stay somewhere where you can't make it. And we're so used to being condemned for staying. A lot of people think that like you're not making it, or you didn't get out, or you're not going to be successful if you don't leave because there's no opportunity here. And that is true to some extent. And that's the other point and reason why West Virginia has the highest rate in the nation of youth out migration. We're constantly losing young people because we don't feel safe here. We don't feel welcome here. And that's financially, culturally, socially, and individualistically. So that's something that burdens me every day of my life, knowing that I'm making these powerful connections with individuals that I really love and care about, and knowing that they will probably leave. And I am not someone that can leave. I just morally feel like I have to stay here and fight and do what I can to help the state. So I have serious abandonment issues because of that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And two, I'll put this link in the chat. I know, Bailey, I'm not sure if you are involved with this group at all, but the Stay Project, I know, does a lot of work to address those problems that you were just talking about in terms of empowering youth in order to stay in their communities in Appalachia. I don't know if you want to give them a quick shout out.
Yeah, shout out to Stay, because they're the first organization that I at least know of, and the only one running right now that is actually trying to address, these intersectional issues of why young people struggle to stay. So I love the Stay Project. Going forth with YACJA, Youth for Appalachian Climate Justice, which all of us are a part of. We're super excited and eager to work with them to try to make Appalachia a place that young people are proud of and can stay in.
Awesome, thank you. I also love YACJA. There's so many acronyms in these organizations, but that's a good one. I like it. It's a work in progress, says Rachel. And so, yeah, I guess now with a bit of context, just with everything that's going on in your communities. So We've heard a lot of health impacts, impacts from air quality, some of the more sociological impacts. I really appreciated that, Bailey. I was a sociology major as well, also environmental studies. And so, and just how communities are dealing with the social health, economic burdens of living in Appalachia, essentially as a resource colony. So that's kind of all a big downer. And I'm wondering if we can, if you can share with our audience, not to create false hope, but just how are you fighting back as a student? What are you, how are you claiming power on your universities or in your communities to fight back against this industry and to fight back against just the history of extraction and the histories of harm in your communities? And Leah, you can go ahead and start us off. And if I interrupt you, it's because of your Wi-Fi. I know maybe you can, but we'll start with your video on.
I can turn it off at any point. Well, I'm so glad that you brought up hope, because I was just listening to one of my favorite podcasts, How to Survive the End of the World. And they were talking about hope as a survival skill and joy as a survival skill, specifically for kind of the eco side and climate apocalypse and different things. So that's something that I've really been focusing on and creating hope, but really finding it. So in 2019, I founded the College of Wooster's Environmental Justice Coalition, kind of as a response to a need for sustainability initiatives and climate justice work that focused on the intersection of like sustainability and like every other justice issue. We had a sustainability group on campus previously that focused a lot on campus sustainability, which is really important, but in an area of the country and in this time in the world where ecocide and climate issues are so pressing and so important, I felt like it was important to kind of get a wider view. So we started in 2019, have held several events, including a climate strike, wouldn't call it a conversation, an event, a panel on Black lives and decolonizing climate justice that was really popular and successful over the summer and sparked some work surrounding discussing how green spaces can be seen as white spaces and how to create like more welcoming green spaces on campus and beyond. We've also worked with some local groups for petrochemical buildout, like petition or against petrochemical buildout, I should specify that. So those have been some really important things in my work that I've been working on. Also in October of this year, I started the College of Wooster Mutual Aid Collective, which focuses on community mutual aid, but also how to make communities more sustainable and how community care is a form of resilience and climate justice. So those have been some really big things. I've also had the opportunity to work with the University of Michigan on doing research on challenges faced by marginalized farmers in the Midwest, which brought up a lot of issues, including petrochemical build out and the role that plastics play again in agriculture and in farmers markets and in our food system. So kind of going into food justice as well there. So I see Rachel's had their hand up for a while, so go for it.
No worries. And no shade to you or whatever you want to say, but I'm actually really anti-hope. Mary Anais Hegler and Amy Westervelt have a podcast called Hot Take, and they talk about being anti-hope because at the end of the day, I don't really hold on to hope. I think I'm just angry and passionate and like trying to get it done. So I'm not the best person to come to about hope, but I think not holding on to this abstract hope is what actually motivates me to do the work, because I'm not holding on to the idea that someone else is going to do it. As far as what I do, I have been pushing with the Student Zero Coalition here to try to get the university to sign the Breakthrough from Plastic Pledge, which is what Marshall did. It's going okay. It's making progress, which is at WVU, like, is something to be said for that. As I mentioned before, I'm also doing research on the emotional consequences of living near pipelines in collaboration with a couple of different nonprofits, including OVEC and the Ohio Health Project, Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition, sorry, acronyms, also known as OVEC. And then, yeah, the rest of my time is spent working on this conference and coalition work, which we'll talk about in the end as well. But yeah. Bryant?
Yeah, I just wanted to like talk about like, what I did, especially a part of the STOP program. So I've been working on like getting rid of single-use plastic bottles on campus, and that was really cool. And then it led to like a conversation of like, instead of pushing for canned water, pushing for like everyone to use like refilling stations. And it's really cool to like to see faculty just support for like a semi-radical thing that would change the campus and like what it looks like a lot. So that was really cool. And then just like general educating and like reaching out to community members. But that was kind of halted because of the events that were happening in Louisville early in the summer into the semester, and then COVID itself, which was kind of unfortunate. But just like reaching out and like trying to make those connections in the greater community and the campus community, because like a lot of people, like they come from like other parts of Kentucky and just like don't know anything or like don't have connections here. So just like getting them connected and like kind of informed about what's going on here and like ways they can help is where I find most of my time and how I've really been impactful. And then Selena.
Yeah, going off of what Bryant said, I think one of like the biggest issues for me in being on my campus is definitely like a lack of education or lack of understanding regarding the petrochemical industry and just plastics in general. So in 2019, I actually spent a whole year studying sustainability through a study abroad program called USAC, the University Study Abroad Consortium. So I actually went to Costa Rica to study sustainability for an entire year. And then whenever I got back to my campus, I actually brought back kind of like the sustainability agenda that I learned while studying abroad in Costa Rica, as Costa Rica is a huge leader in sustainability and renewable energy. And so I went through this program, and then whenever I came back, I was like able to see kind of, you know, the issues very clearly at my college surrounding environmental justice and things like that. So I think the first thing for me that I worked on in my community was definitely bringing awareness and attention around recycling. So like my school didn't even really have a recycling program. And I also think that like people think recycling is just like the end all be all. Like it's just like the best solution to our kind of like plastic crisis or like all of our consumption culture. And so even though like I worked really hard to even like get a recycling program on our campus, get new recycling bins and things like that, because I thought that was important. I started realizing that people were getting like overly dependent on that. And then I was like, okay, people like maybe don't understand exactly, you know, these issues very well. And so that kind of inspired me to bring more attention and more education to what was going on in our community. And so this past semester, I actually hosted our school's first sustainability summit. So with that, it was like a whole day event, kind of in honor of Earth Day, but really to just bring awareness to students regarding environmental issues in our community, and also like helping students to understand that environmental justice is more than just environmental issues, like direct environmental issues, if that makes sense. I really think it's like a larger umbrella concept that talks about issues like gentrification, environmental racism, health crisis, housing crisis, things like that. And I was really focusing on getting people to understand that, and also that anybody can be part of this movement, and we want everybody to be part of this movement. And so hosting the sustainability summit, we had some really great guest speakers, both like regionally and internationally. We actually had Majora Carter speak at our event, urban revolution strategist from the Bronx. She was great, as well as a couple of international speakers, one from Germany and then one actually from Uganda. among students and things like that. But it was really great because I really wanted to find like the intersections and the synergies between like students on campus and these issues. And so I actually was able to gather about 15 of my university's clubs together, and each of them talked about or presented or did like some kind of anything really about how environmental issues kind of like coincide with their club's mission statement. So for example, I'm really active in the Latin American Cultural Association on our campus, and we hosted a huge talk about the climate migration crisis happening in Central America. And the biology club hosted like a huge talk about water conservation, things like that. We also have like an active minds club, and they were able to talk about climate anxiety and host things regarding those issues. And so for me, it's definitely helping students, you know, relate to these problems. And I don't think that's just for students. I think that's for everybody, you know, opening everybody's eyes to see that like, yeah, these might be like environmental issues, but they're impacting us on a daily basis more than we know, or maybe more than some of us think about. I don't know about you guys, but for like me, I have huge climate anxiety. I think about these things all the time. Like I can't even go to the store and buy like, I don't know, like an orange without thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm in Pennsylvania. Oranges don't grow here. Like, where is this coming from? And these are just like things that I'm constantly thinking about. And then I see people who don't think about them at all. And I feel like there's like two extremes with that. And so I really think it's kind of helping people to understand, you know, all these issues that are impacting us daily, and then collectively and collaboratively having the hope in order to kind of create a solution to those problems. But I think, in my opinion, like first, in order to do that, in order to have hope, it's first you have to educate everybody. You know, everybody has to be on the same page before we can make a difference.
Wow. Yeah, that was, I feel like you got a lot in the chat of like, oh my gosh, I relate. I know I was thinking that, especially towards the end there. But thank you so much, Selena, for sharing. So Bailey, do you want to speak to a little bit of some of the things that you're doing to fight back against this industry and fight these issues?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my introduction, I co-founded Marshall Sustainability Club because my freshman year, I knew that I really wanted to engage in environmental and social justice activism, and there wasn't any kind of like social or environmentally related club, so I figured I would just make one and go from there. So I've really spent a lot of time just trying to, you know, organize students so that we can come together and make change in whatever way we see fit at the time. So we've engaged in multiple different petitions. As I mentioned, we got our school to break free from plastic, so we'll be completely plastic free within a few years. That's very exciting. I built a connection between the club and local nonprofits like Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition, POPCO, Post Landfill Action Network. So I'm eager to see students kind of take the reins and go from there and continue working with these awesome nonprofits. Individually, I am doing my capstone research on the narrative that youth in West Virginia received from the fossil fuel industry. So I've been doing content analysis, looking at what types of claims are being made to young people. You know, how are these claims being made, by what means, and why? So that has been upsetting, honestly, to do, but it's important work because no one has looked at that before. So I'm excited to add to existing sociological literature in that way, so that that research and data can be further used, hopefully, for social political change. I also do art. So Rachel, can you pull up the PowerPoint really quick? I'll show everyone a piece that I worked on. So as Rachel pulls that up, I'll just describe it really quickly. So basically, I was walking to campus one day and I saw trash laying everywhere, mostly plastic. And I thought to myself that, you know, people have dropped this, they've thrown it down, they've thrown it out of their cars, it's flown out of trash cans, you know, however it did, it got right below my feet as I'm walking to campus. And so I just started to think about how convenient plastic has become. You know, often we don't have other choices but to buy plastic if you want a specific good, especially in rural America. And so I thought, what if I took this plastic and put it somewhere so that people have to look at it? I think it's a really big problem that we sort of buy whatever it is, use whatever it is that's in the container, and then we throw it away, and we don't really have to think about it again. We don't have to think about the environmental and social consequences of where our plastic waste ends up. So this is just one way that I get really excited about informing and educating people, because I think that, there is that sense of hope that has to be there. For me personally, I know everyone is different, but if I don't have hope, I get burnt out, and then I'm not productive for any reason, including like self-care and things like that, which are just as important. So I think combining something that is really heavy and, hard to talk about, and it's hard for people to care about because many people don't have the mental or emotional capacity to. Living in late stage capitalism, we're all just kind of, at our wits' end here. So I think that combining something that is serious and heavy with something that can be fun and colorful is super important. And you reach a whole different center of people's brains. It activates, different parts of the brain to see something and learn from it. So art is something that really excites me, and I think it's a great tool of resistance that communities have been using for a really long time. So Marshall Sustainability Club obtained a grant, and we're going to work on a mural that will travel around campus. So it'll be kind of like a banner. And we really want to highlight how different communities are affected by the petrochemical industry, while also sort of shedding light on what West Virginia can be and what the nation can be, because it is possible. I think that it just takes a hell of a lot of resistance. And so I'm really excited to work on the mural with the other club members and hopefully educate more people on campus. I would say that everyone else put it really perfectly. I think that the number one thing is to educate and spread awareness. And sometimes that doesn't feel very proactive because you don't feel like you're directly doing something, but it plants seeds that will spread very quickly and eventually will blossom into organized collective action. So for me, that's probably the most important thing, is that we are collective and we join together, because as individuals and even as small groups, it feels like an impossible task to take on these giant entities because they're all interrelated, especially in West Virginia. So it becomes very overwhelming if you don't have the proper support and the proper numbers to show up in ways that matter. So something that I hope for just about every day of my life is a labor uprising in West Virginia, like we have seen throughout history here so many times. I think that if we can get the youth and union workers, or people who are even who are not organized or unionized, if we can get them together, blue collar workers and young people, there may be very different, there may be disagreements when it comes to political ideology or whatever it may be, but at the end of the day, this is a place that we call home, and we have to come together and fight together. So still figuring out how to do that. Don't really know how to connect the two yet, but something I'm really passionate about. And I think maybe art can be a way to facilitate that bridge potentially.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, that mural, I was really blown away by that. It's like so ugly, like the trash, but so beautiful and just thought provoking. And just, I'm blown away by all of you. You're all so wise and just doing really incredible things. One thing, that question, it just kind of came out talking about hope in that little section. And a quote that came to me, my friend actually texted it to me, and I feel like it's extremely relevant. And I just wanted to read it about hope, and something that I really resonate with. And it kind of sounds like each of you resonate with as well. That hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. It is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. To hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future is what makes the present inhabitable. And I think that speaks just really well to that we can't just have this rosy sense of hope, but that whether hope is, it manifests in anger that we need to fight for justice, or whether it's love for our communities and we build resiliency, that that hope is not just sitting and wishing for a better tomorrow, but organizing in our communities and building power and really creating that change that we want to see. So thank you, all of you, so much for those words. So just to continue a little bit on some of these major themes, I guess just along the lines of youth organizing in general, there are some terms that have been thrown around: mutual aid, intersectionality, environmental justice, and climate justice. It's really inspiring how the youth movement for climate justice, I feel like outside of traditional environmental spaces, it's becoming increasingly clear that social, racial, economic, labor justice, and environmental justice, that it's all the same, and that you can't fight for one without the other. And especially in Appalachia, that has a really unique history. I'm wondering if each of you could just speak to some of the ways that intersectionality informs your political analysis of these issues, how it guides your organizing, and whether that's based in Appalachia or whether it's just how you address these issues throughout your work. I know that's a big one, but.
I can start with that. A thing that I think about a lot is false solutions, because at the end of the day, the climate crisis, as we term it, we being people in the environmental movement, is a result of white supremacy, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. And so any solution that is not resisting and addressing those systems of oppression is not a solution. And I think a great example is solar energy, because I think, we want to see a just transition and see people in Appalachia producing renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. And I don't disagree with that. And I think that it's a lot more complicated than that, because for solar, you need lithium. Lithium is mined. Where's the biggest source of lithium in the world? Chile. Like, what needs to happen to mine that? People are displaced. It becomes a resource colony. And so I think in everything that we're doing, we need to think about what is the consequence of the solution that we're asking for. And so I think also I just want to talk about Palestine. And I think it's very relevant because Israel is like the quintessential example of greenwashing. So Israel says that they made the desert bloom. That's like that's one of the phrases that they like to say. And they talk so much about like renewable energy and how progressive they are in climate policy. And I think that it's very criticized as a distraction for, or a way to legitimize the state of Israel, who is currently and has been conducting ethnic cleansing of Palestinians for 70 years. And so I think I don't think that the environmental sphere can be neutral on any of these issues. I don't think that we can say we don't have an opinion about the US military. We don't have an opinion about how solar energy is produced. And so I think, to me, it is important that we have a comprehensive political analysis that contributes to how we see all of these solutions and how we're interrogating them. And I want to say that like this is something that youth climate organizers do super well, and it's also not something that we started. I think like the Black Power movement and like the Third World International movement Indigenous movements are all really great, and like organizers that I learned from and that have been doing this for a really long time. And I think it's amazing that it's moved into the climate movement, but I also want to shout out that lots of people before us have sort of paved the way for that. So I'll stop there. Also, if you want to talk more about Palestine after this, I'm very happy to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I feel like that definitely reiterates the point that there is no such thing as a neutral stance, that taking a stance of neutrality is in fact a stance, and a lot of times it's a stance that's complicit in harm and oppression. One thing I just wanted to verbalize as well, the quote I read was from Rebecca Solnit. I realized I never credited the person who said that. But anyway, Leah, I saw you had your hand up. I'd love for you to speak to this question as well.
Yeah, I just want to thank Rachel for going first and putting everything way more eloquently than I would. And I'm really glad that you brought up Palestine. And then also something that I have been thinking a lot in teaching and organizing surrounding environmental justice is kind of getting at the roots and thinking about the origins of the movement, specifically in the United States, because like that's the context that we're in now, but also, or that I've done most of my organizing in. But also worldwide, and thinking about origins in Indigenous peoples movements, but specifically in the civil rights movement. And so that's something that's often overlooked, and it's a really whitewashed field now, or at least like in academia, like as someone that's studying environmental studies and sociology, there can be a lot of difficulty around the field, like not only presenting as being a white dominated field, but also like perpetuating ideas around like eugenics and really harmful theories and practices that are kind of talked about in the name of environmental justice or of sustainability. And I think that there's so much unlearning. And yeah, ecofascism. Sorry, I just we actually had a great the Environmental Justice Coalition at the College of Wooster had a great like presentation and discussion about ecofascism this year, and kind of the process of unlearning, especially being in a country that perpetuates a lot of fascism and ecofascism as well. And so doing like doing a lot of deep reflection, both like personally and in like community and environmental work is really important. There was something else I was going to say on that, but we can come back to it. Yeah, and also like taking steps back, especially as organizers. I've been thinking a lot about how movements are strong, not because of leaders, but because of everyone who is involved, kind of like the ensemble idea. And so that's something that I've also been working on with mutual aid and horizontal organizing. So I think these are a lot of fragmented thoughts, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking to those things. So just for time's sake, does maybe one more person want to speak a bit more to the intersectionality and justice of the organizing that you do, or the organizing that you've seen in your movement? Selena?
Yeah, so as I like briefly mentioned before, like my last big event planning project on my campus was the Sustainability Summit, which was like my goal was to kind of help people to find their synergies and the intersectionalities between like environmental justice and, you know, whatever interests them, and using that kind of like formula, you know, using your interests in order to like interest you in the EVJ movement and stuff. I thought that worked really well. And like just from my own personal experience being like a triple major in college and having like a concentration in something else, every single project that I've done in college, like at least 90% in all of my majors, they've all come back to doing like something along the lines of the environment. Like it always comes back. Like for example, I did my interfaith capstone project on the Dakota Access Pipeline, and I kind of like analyzed how that was an environmental slash religious slash interfaith movement in itself. And like people are just like, oh my gosh, like what does like religion have to do with the environment? But there's so much. Or like currently finishing up my undergrad, I'm writing my thesis for international studies on environmental policy rollbacks under the Bolsonaro administration in Brazil. You know, so I don't know, just I feel like anybody who studies anything or anybody who has any type of interest whatsoever, I feel like there's something along the lines of the environment tied up in that that you don't even know about. And it's really important to educate yourself about those things. Like, I don't know, maybe you're into knitting. You know, where are you getting your fibers? Where are the microfibers going? Microfibers are huge. Microplastics, you know, in our water sources. I'm sure that you could find absolutely anything in regards to a synergy and a hobby or any type of topic. And to me, you know, when people tell me like, oh yeah, I'm not really interested in like the environment and stuff, my first question is like, okay, what are you interested in? You know? And then that's kind of how I help people to kind of like find that passion or understand, you know, things from their like understand our movement from their perspective, because I do know a lot of people who are a little bit on the more conservative side, to put it nicely. And sometimes, you know, it's hard. It's hard to help people to understand your point of view. But I think building bridges like between different communities and trying to find commonality between people who are different than yourself is really like something that needs to be done more so. And I think that a lot of people think that, you know, we're just kind of like our own group as environmental justice advocates or, you know, whatever. And really, I feel like how like ourselves as activists, like we want all the help we can get. Like at least I know I do. Like anybody, like I welcome anybody to be part of this movement. And so I think building bridges between people who you may not have much in common with in order to kind of like work towards these goals is really important in helping people to understand that like, you know, maybe you like this or that, here's the environmental implications so you can understand it from their point of view. Very important.
Wow, thank you so much. And I feel like that was the most beautiful, perfect segue into sort of the last topic that we wanted to talk about here before we take a few questions from folks in the audience. But lastly, so we've shared a lot about a lot of the great work that you're doing and how you're building power. And I feel like we've just been able to learn a little bit more about the movement, the youth climate movement in Appalachia. And so for folks who are on the call and in the audience, and also just advice for all adults out there trying to be an ally to the movement, what are some things that they can do to support the work that you're doing? What are some things that they shouldn't do that maybe is well intended, but isn't actually supporting in the way that is intended? I guess just what best practices do you want to share for adults that are looking to uplift and support the work that you all do?
Cool. I can go first. My experience with adult allyship has been giving information primarily, because there's a lot of places that I don't have access to or information about that adults seem to just know about, and it's really helpful. An example is on campus, there's a lot of positions that I don't know what they actually do, and then I have an advisor who can like kind of inform it. And instead of speaking for me in those spaces, she invites me to them and allows me to talk to myself and like share my ideas, and then they kind of help me like bounce. It's like more of a respect thing, or like on the same level, and it's just a nice conversation. And then we share ideas, and then just like push issues, and just giving that space. Like this is an amazing example of not I don't know what the AZ talk is, or like how to like come here, but like you gave us a platform, and now we can speak about our experiences as students and like younger people in the space. So it's just, for me, is like mainly like uplifting and like allowing someone the time to speak for themselves, and just like helping them get into those spaces even to start.
I'll go ahead and jump in really quick. So I think that something really important, if folks aren't already doing this, is start to educate yourself on these things that we are very passionate about, all these intersectional issues. So, you know, make sure you're reading, watching, listening to things about decolonization, like things like land back, you know, anti-racism, like there, I can go on and on, you know. Yeah, so I think like one of the biggest problems that a lot of young people have seen is that in these mainstream, really popular environmental movements, there has been a great lack of social justice awareness. And it definitely hasn't been emphasized very often. And that's one of the things that we are most passionate about, is just like equality and just all of these issues that kind of maybe sound like buzzwords. So knowing what the words mean and what the roots are, which we've talked about a lot, I think that is a great way to be an adult ally. And also, I know social media is annoying for me as well as a young person, but it is a huge way that we connect with each other as social creatures. And so uplifting our work, so like our Instagram pages, Twitter, Facebook, I do art, so I put my art on Instagram. That's the main way that I am able to sell a lot of the things that I make. So it's just a great way to uplift and amplify voices and young movements. So being active on social media, if you can do so, is really helpful to us. And just word of mouth, just telling people who we are and what we're doing and how we're organizing is really helpful to us.
I think I might have had my hand up first, but slightly. I guess I will do a good and a thing I don't like and a thing I do like. I have gripes with this simultaneous hearing all the time. Young people inspire me so much. You guys are gonna like save us all, as though it should be on us to try to save the world. And at the same time, inviting young people into spaces to do work that those spaces want to see, rather than having young people lead work that they want to see. And so I think like inviting people in to do labor, but not inviting them to have autonomy over what they're doing creates like this perpetuated power imbalance. And so a thing that I really like is when organizations respect and appreciate that young people are going to have very different tactics and analysis, and that there can be synergies in those things, and there can also be autonomy for young people to do it in the way that they want to do it. And again, like what Bailey said, I really appreciate, like, if you're like, how is abolish the police related to climate change? Seek out information on it or have a conversation about it, instead of saying you're distracting from what's the real issue here. So I think, yeah, allowing young people to have autonomy and creating synergy without, I guess, questioning the tactics or the analysis. Because I think there are lots of places for synergies and for mutual supports, but if, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? The word, I'm not gonna think of the word. Yeah, I'm gonna stop talking. Leah.
There's so much I want to touch on and so little time left. So thank you so much for that. I think that resource sharing was the first thing that I thought of, which is something that Bryant talked about. Wealth redistribution is a big thing within mutual aid, but also I think within climate futures. And so that's a big thing to look into, especially because our generation does not have the wealth. And that's something that with redistribution, could be really positive. Listening and honoring the practices and techniques of young people in organizing while also like respecting and honoring all practices and having some, or listening and kind of working through that before judgment. Another thing, yeah, just with what Rachel, sorry, all of these thoughts are kind of all over the place, which with what Rachel was talking about tokenizing, and how kind of we're seen as the only option. I think that it's also a symptom of capitalism and colonialism to kind of have all these ideas around youth and how youth are the only ones that have this ability. But aging is beautiful and wonderful, and there's so much that you can do and that everyone can do, regardless of age or position. And so I think that's another thing, is using where you are and the resources that you have and the knowledge that you have, to support yourself, your community, and the environment. Also, youth climate justice organizers and groups are often really good about being explicit about what they want and what they need from adult allies. And so luckily, there's not a lot of guesswork to do. The Sunrise Movement has like toolkits and all sorts of things. So it's something that you can kind of be guided through if you want, but also can, suggest ideas while understanding that this is something that youth organizers have been thinking about for a long time. So thank you.
Yeah, wow. All that is really incredible advice and really important to share. I guess I just want to add as well, solidarity in terms of like something that adults can do, different ways to be in solidarity with a lot of these movements for justice. Put your pronouns in your email bio, and like if you see, I don't know, different things that justice-based groups and youth-based groups are doing, and you may not know what it is, do your research like y'all were saying, and just even if it doesn't fully click the first time you read it, just to explore and lean into it. I think that's something really important. And then also too, something that I think kind of goes across boundaries of allyship for various communities. I think something that I'm sure a lot of folks are really familiar with is the step in front of, step beside, and stand back. And I think that adult allyship can really learn a lot from that as well. So in terms of stepping in front of, not necessarily stepping in front of, but there are times where adults have power that youth don't have. And so adults in power can withstand criticism and judgment better than youth. And so, or have the social status, I guess, in order to, can take a little bit of a hit versus youth. And so I think that's something that adults can do sometimes. I mean, in terms of stepping beside, I think that a lot of that solidarity of just marching alongside youth, joining the movement, listening. And then in terms of stepping behind as well, I think just allowing youth to do their thing, to, I guess, to, I don't know, do their activism in the way that works for them. But then to just to show your support, because it's really sad that youth activism, it shouldn't have to be validated by adults, but often it does. Just to have, like, for example, when I was a student organizer at my college campus, I was really lucky to have the support of the college campus sustainability director. And so the students, we organized for a lot of awesome environmental sustainability initiatives on campus. And we would say, like, this is what we want as students. And then we also had this adult in a position of power behind us who said, yeah, what they said, and so that's something that also a lot of adults can do to really show support for the movement that can unfortunately legitimize in a way that it shouldn't need to, but that is kind of the reality. So, wow, so time is really running out here. So I have seen there's been quite a few questions in the chat, but also a lot of answers in the chat that has been really nice. I see, Frederick, you have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question to our panelists? Maybe not.
Not,
Oh, there.
not necessarily a question. First of all, I want to applaud every single one of you for the work and your dedication and motivation for doing what you're doing, because you guys in the year 2021 are me 52 years ago. And frankly, I don't have another 52 years to give to this. I've been doing environmental work since the year before the first Earth Day. My profession is I'm a science librarian with degrees in biology, zoology, and library science. I've worked as a toxicologist and research in environmental health and toxicology. I've got this head of white hair gives me the right to call myself a sage and pass on some sage advice. I jotted down a lot of notes. Take your passions to your local and state governments, even if you just go as a contingent of one. Talk to your legislators, regardless of what their political parties or affiliations are. You need to talk to the people who are making the policies and convincing them that what you are projecting is something that they should be projecting for the good of your community, for the good of your state, and even take it to your representatives and your senators, because it's for the good of the nation. So take your message to the state, or take your message to the government leaders. The other one, I couched this one with a certain degree of caution by saying, stop talking to the choirs. You can talk to environmental groups and you're just telling them and reinforcing information they probably already know or know about. Don't stop doing that, but really get out there and really hit the pavement and talk to the conservation groups. I talk to a lot of different conservation groups because I hunt and fish. I can find common ground about climate change by saying to Trout Unlimited or Bassmasters groups, I like to fish and I want my grandson to be able to fish when he's in his 20s, 30s, teens. He may fish next year because he's only 16 months old right now. But get out there and really press your message to the people who need to hear what you're talking about. So go to those groups, those places where, yeah, it might be a little uncomfortable. And I bet you'll find yourself surprised, because I know I have turned a lot of heads and said, wow, we never looked at environmental issues from this. I talk mostly on climate change. I was trained among the very first 250 people that Al Gore trained to give his presentations. And that was more than 14 years ago. An Inconvenient Truth, by the way, is 15 years old next month. And I was just thinking, I said, I started my environmental journey when your parents were little kids, and I started my climate work way before you guys were born. So, but I just wanted to say is to really think about where your message needs to be heard. I put about 5 things in the chat about some people you should really get to know. If you can find the time to get her onto your campus, get Catherine Hayhoe to come to your campus and talk. She's got a schedule that is really stretched out. I met her 8 years ago or so.
Yeah,
I've invited her to a couple of
Um,
keynotes, but take a look what's in the chat and
Thank you.
keep fighting the fight. Fight the good fight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I wonder, so we are close to the end, so I don't think that we have time for any more questions for the audience, unfortunately. But just some of the points that Frederick brought up in terms of, talking to folks outside of your circle, I think that's something the youth movement does really beautifully in terms of talking to decision makers. Do any of you want to respond to that or elaborate a little bit more on some of those things? Oh, I see, Rachel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the advice. And I think that we might think we're all the same choir, but I think it's also really important that we're organizing within the environmental movement, because part of the reason we formed this coalition is because the mainstream environmental organizations can advocate for climate solutions that we think are actually not solutions. And so I think it is important to organize outside of our spheres, but also within our spheres, because there's a lot that we need to work on. There's a lot that we need to work on when it comes to being a white space. There's a lot that we need to work on when it comes to being a classist space, a settler space. So I think I wanted to just say yes and to that point, because I think universalizing discourse has been used a lot in the environmental movement at the detriment of excluding people and limiting our organizing.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I am wondering really quickly also to the point that Frederick made about talking to elected officials. I feel like I've seen kind of a spectrum of a lot of folks find a lot of hope in terms of, or like see that as a really powerful way to make change. Some folks have become so disillusioned with our political system that, you know, they're taking like mutual aid, they're taking action into their own hands. I'm wondering if any of you want to speak to where political advocacy falls within your youth organizing. And that'll be our last question, at least before we move into discussion about the conference.
I'll just say again, I think there's space for synergies. I will never organize within like the federal policy regime. It is not my wheelhouse. It is not where I feel fulfilled. And I think it's okay that people feel fulfilled in organizing in different realms. But that's not something that I do. It's not something that I feel fulfilled by. And so I have a lot more, I think, success and hope, even though I said I'm anti-hope, more hope when I'm doing the direct action on the ground, mutual aid, community organizing. And I think there are other people in this space who are much better at the institutional organizing. And I think that it's great that we can do both, so long as we're taking care about what the policies that we're advocating and the consequences of those policies. And I think when you have direct action and institutional groups in conversation and aligning on like grounding principles, I think I feel a lot more optimism about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. So with that, there's so much more. We could talk about so many more things tonight. This has been a really rich conversation. I will say, so we're getting on 8:30, so our official program is going to end at 8:30. For folks who want to stick around, we may have, depending on who all wants to stick around, we could have a few breakout rooms just to kind of debrief the program, chat and network a bit. But I also want to just invite folks right now, in order to continue the conversation, maybe to post to folks some questions that you didn't get a chance to ask our panelists. You can join the A to Z community online at impactsofplastic.com. And so there you can, it's kind of an online platform that you can use to chat and collaborate with other folks in the A to Z Impacts of Plastic community. And then also if you want to follow us on social media and join the conversation that way, I also put our Facebook page on there. And I see Ryan put a link to the campaign network. And so last, I wanted to just give our awesome panelists a chance to talk about an event that they're working on where you can hear more from them and learn more about what they're doing. And I believe, Rachel, that's you again.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen. So I mentioned in the chat, I feel like we maybe should have also mentioned it at the beginning, but we're planning a conference at the end of June for youth in Appalachia working toward climate justice. We're going to do a few workshops, but it's also just going to be a space to really connect and have networking for people who share similar ideologies working toward climate justice in Appalachia. So our Instagram and Twitter is @YouthForACJ. And there is a website where you can register. This is a QR code. If anyone's good at doing those, you just hold your phone camera up to the QR code and it'll take you to the link. I also put the link in the chat. And we're really excited about it. We're having some really awesome speakers come. And I think we've talked so much about like building power, coalition building, and this is how we're doing it currently. Because we all started at separate schools, didn't know each other, came together through this program, and be like, wouldn't it be great if this was like 10 times bigger and we were all talking to each other and in solidarity supporting each other's actions. So yeah, if you know anyone in the like under 30-ish who would like to attend this conference, again, like we appreciate adult allyship, and I think it's also important that we have spaces to talk to each other and center youth, and so this is a space for that. But yeah, if you know anyone 30 and under, tell them to check out this conference. We're really excited about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so there's a lot of links in the chat for each of you to check out to spread the word about the conference. If you follow A to Z on social media or join us on the campaign network, we'll be posting those links over and over again. So you'll definitely have access to them there as well. I just want to thank our panelists one more time. This conversation has been so incredible, and each of you are just so unbelievably wonderful, and we've all learned so much from you, and it's just really inspiring to just share this space with each of you. So